we're obviously living in the information age, but with unlimited information comes unlimited noise.
Welcome to the Talking AI podcast, where we talk AI with both experts in the field and early adopters. I'm your host, Matt Paige, and we're here to demystify AI for you so you can get some value from it. Let's talk some AI. AI is everywhere, but most of us can't answer a simple question. Why should we trust what it tells us? And a lot of that comes down to something no one wants to talk about, which is the quality and the provenance of the data these systems learn from. Today, I'm joined by Rowan Stone, CEO of Sapien, a decentralized data foundry focused on turning collective human knowledge into verified enterprise-grade training data. And we're going to get into what that means. But Rowan has helped drive on-chain products at Coinbase, and now he's applying that don't trust, verify mindset to AI, building what Sapien calls proof of quality for the data supply chain. We'll dig into incentives, validation, synthetic data, and what it'll take to trust AI agents in the real world. But great to have you on, Rowan.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun chat. The world that you've spent a lot of time in, I think, has a lot of translation into the world of AI that we're playing in now and is so emergent. But I first want to ground the conversation in what you're building at Sapien and the problem you're focused on solving. I think that'll be good context setting for this conversation around data, which is like the most important thing when it comes to AI.
Yeah, I think the best way to frame this is that we're obviously living in the information age, but with unlimited information comes unlimited noise. And so for us, what we're trying to do is build a system that will enable AI builders, typically, to be able to figure out what's fact and what's fiction, to try and actually get to the point where they can understand that the data set that they're using to train their model is actually the right data and something that's going to give them a good, trustworthy output. And so we're basically trying to answer two key questions for builders. It's like, who created the data and can that data be trusted? We're doing it in a slightly unique way, approaching the problem from a kind of first principles perspective. And like you said, learning from the on-chain world and applying some of those principles to this AI data problem. And so building a protocol and essentially enabling the builder to rock up, source either data, or it could even be agent output evaluation or validation of an existing data set, and then essentially let the protocol take over, perform the work, which we can get into detail in terms of how that works, and ultimately receive what they need, be that an eval or a set of data, and an attestation that shows that the work has been performed in line with the specification that they provided, and importantly, that that work has been peer reviewed by people that have the relevant knowledge to ensure that the data they're going to use for training is actually decent and not just noise.
Yeah, and I think that it's an interesting thing for the audience. You live on the side of the training being done in the models, the data being used to train the models, data being used to fine-tune models, not necessarily on the inference side and whatnot. But I'm curious, with this insane amount of information out there, like, what are these failure modes that you're most worried about? Right? We have misinformation, we have model collapse, we have bad decisions being done by agents or something else. Like, what sticks out to you? And they're all, potentially bad, but where are the biggest problems going to emerge where bad data is going to rear its head, I suppose?
Quick break in the pod. Our State of AI 2026 report just dropped, and it breaks down what actually is changing in AI, what's hype, and what leaders need to be paying attention to this year. You can grab it right now in our show notes or at hatchworks.com.
Yeah, I essentially view where we are as an industry as a giant test in production mode. Like, we're in the world's biggest public beta.
Yeah.
And so most people who are kind of either building within the ecosystem or just tech forward and kind of understand this stuff, they're going to be using ChatGPT, Claude, insert favorite model here And they're going to take its outputs with a pinch of salt because they know
Yeah.
like these things are not perfect yet. And so I think less concerned about standard text-based chat model style outputs. Sure, you can have something that's factually incorrect. You can also potentially maliciously ingest data into a model and have it kind of steer opinion and kind of move away from ground truth into some sort of prerogative that you may have. Like all of these things are potentially dangerous. There was a case relatively recently where a model, and I forget which one, and it's not worth talking about which one, but a model had been asked by a kid who was experiencing some mental difficulties at the time for support. And ultimately, I think the way it panned out is the model almost egged the kid on to take really horrible action. And so
Yeah.
these are clearly super dangerous. However, even though they sound super dangerous, I'm actually much more worried about models that we invite into the real world. And so those could be autonomous vehicles. You've got a 2-ton car driving around on the streets with like not one person, but everybody and their pets and everything else. And then we are increasingly seeing humanoid robotics kind of coming to the forefront of media attention. There's a ton of companies building some really cool stuff in that space. I've always been a fan of Star Trek and things like this. And so for me, it's almost like we're getting towards the point where we have an ability to make a data, which is really cool. But with that coolness comes a ton of problems. Like now we're inviting a robot that will initially have similar strength to a human, but very clearly will soon have improved strength and dexterity and movement and speed to a normal person. And we're inviting these into the real world to interact with your kids, with your pets, walking down the street. And so all of these cases where we're bringing an AI model into the real world is really where I see the risk as being the highest. And that's for me where I view the kind of tolerance, if you like, for bad data being the absolute least. We need complete surety that these models are trained on super accurate inputs that are properly peer reviewed so that we don't end up with a ton of different safety issues, be that
Yeah.
autonomous car, the plane that flies you on your holiday, the boat that takes you across the river, or a robot walking down the street.
Yeah, you mentioned the scary use case early on, a more mundane one, but I saw Anthropic Claude. They did this earlier in the year, but they basically gave full autonomy to the model to run and manage a vending machine. I don't know if you've seen this
Right.
story yet,
I
but
did.
it basically could go out and purchase things, and it had a goal to turn around a profit, but it was very easily manipulated by different users getting coupon codes, saying, "Hey, I'm the
Yep.
CEO," and it had a lot of kind of hallucination going on. And some of that could be related to the underlying data. A lot of it also related to just the system prompts and how the system's architected, and it's leaning more towards kind of being a helpful assistant. But you mentioned a point earlier, which I think is critical. People just trust these models a lot, right? So if I'm in ChatGPT, the answers sound so good, right? And it's kind of what, and it gets to the incentives. They're incented to provide a probable, good sounding answer and response, right? And I've
Yep.
seen this come through in some data where thinking about people converting or doing things from the responses they get on ChatGPT are much higher than you would see in more normal forms where there's a lot more work on the human to go find the information, the data, figure out a decision and whatnot. But get to the incentive piece, because I think that's a huge underlying aspect to all of this. And I think this whole problem you mentioned, right? It's the biggest, largest, beta in the world. I think it's a great way of framing it. I think it's just an under discussed topic.
Yep. I mean, the incentives are perverse and insane. Like,
Yeah.
there is a ton of money to be made for all of the companies that are trying to build these things. And so you will see companies doing what's best for them and their shareholders and not necessarily thinking about what's best for the planet, what's best for us, what's best for humanity as a species. And this kind of opens a bit of a Pandora's box of discussion. But if we pair it back to the incentives for them kind of to proliferate a model, what they're really trying to do is put a friend in a user's pocket and get to
Yeah.
the point where the user is able to converse and trust said friend's outputs, because then they have essentially an ability to kind of sit on the user's shoulder and
Hmm.
recommend courses of action and monetize in many, many
Yeah.
different ways. If you think about how Google typically operates, they answer your questions and
Hmm.
they make suggestions for things that they think that you might like, and they make a ton of money just by understanding you and suggesting the right things. I see that as being a likely course that we're going to end up with. But I think the tricky thing that we have, particularly in kind of the current giant public beta, is that it's not well understood how the models are behaving and how they are trying to gain your trust and to kind
Hmm.
of be that trusted confidant or whatever. And the way that, let's just pick on ChatGPT because it's huge and basically everybody uses it. The
Hmm.
way that it typically operates, or at least the way the current models operate, is that they'll be overly agreeable. And so if you ask a question and it's relatively open and you kind of suggest an answer within your question, it's quite likely that the model will give you that reassurance of like, yeah, you're on the right track. That's super
Yeah.
cool. Great thinking. If you're in a business scenario and you're like, oh, I don't really know how to deal with this weird thing that's going on, like what should I do with my customer or whatever, it's probably going to reinforce whatever it is that you've partly suggested. And the danger there is that you're basically just talking to yourself. Like you're creating a
Hmm.
circle jerk of like groupthink basically
Yeah.
between you and a model, rather than having like a real objective ground truth seeking advisor who'll basically just say, no, Rowan, like you're full of shit. That doesn't make any
Hmm.
sense. Do this
Which
instead.
we all need.
And so absolutely, like to me, that's the real benefit of having something that you can chat to and something that you can bounce ideas off of. And so I know your audience are pretty savvy, but there's a really quick way to, I guess, patch in some way.
Hmm.
All of the models at this stage have an ability to tweak how they answer you and to tweak how they respond to questions and prompts. And so you can literally just prompt within your settings, like, do not be agreeable
Yeah.
and seek the truth and make sure that you are challenging my thinking and position yourself as an expert in yada, yada, yada. Like you can make your own prompt. But it's super important to understand that without that type of setting, you're going to get a circle jerk of like, yeah, that's great. Do more
Yeah.
of that. And
Yeah.
that's
Totally.
because they're incentivized to make you enjoy chatting to it.
Yeah. It's the whole sycophantic nature of it. I mean, when it makes its way to a South Park episode, it's reached mass scale
Right.
in a sense. But another tip on that side, what I like to do is when I'm in a conversation, tell whatever model I'm working to be critical of the response it just gave me. Like go and be critical of your own response, and that's another way to kind of break
Yep.
it of that pattern in a sense. But getting back to the data side, so because like you said, the training side of models is very much feels like a black box in a sense, and
Yep.
people kind of have this understanding that it's trained on all the data on the internet, it's just scraped all the data, but there's nuance to that, and there are companies that are assisting these model makers. You mentioned like autonomous cars in terms of labeling data and all these different things. What does that world look like today? And then where is the gap? And I think what's super interesting is you're introducing this protocol, and this is not where the Sapien started, right? I believe y'all started more on like the services side, and it kind of came into this
Yep.
almost infrastructure protocol world. But it has like learnings from the crypto world in a sense. So I'd love to kind of understand what's the difference between what exists today, what you're building, and how that is potentially different and better.
So what exists today is large BPOs, people operations essentially,
Hmm.
typically in the developing world, who are asked to create data sets or evaluate existing data sets, annotate over the top of them, provide
Yeah.
extra context. If we take the autonomous vehicle example, they're driving millions of miles all around the world in
Yeah.
different countries. they're collecting video data, sensor data, whatever it might be. It depends on the company, what they've chosen to kind of work with. And whenever they encounter a funny scenario they don't know how to deal with, then that creates a kind of a data request, if you like, in an annotation queue, and it
Yeah.
goes out to one of these shops full of people. And then people will look at the data, they'll try and figure out where the car is in space and time, what it's looking at, and importantly, give it the extra context it needs so the model can better understand that scenario in the future and know how to safely navigate whatever that might have been. And so the current model is very much traditional service business. And you're right, it's a bit of a black box. If, for example, a car crashes into something, let's just take an extreme example. The obvious question is going to be like, who is at fault? Like, was it
Yeah.
the autonomous vehicle, or was it like, did the wall jump out at it? Whatever. And in a world where it's the autonomous vehicle at fault, we don't have visibility in terms of where did the data come from, who created the data, can the data actually be trusted, how was the training done, how was the inference done. It's very much proprietary to each individual company
Yeah.
that are building these models. And in some ways, that's right. But in other ways, when we're bringing real, heavy, dangerous things into the real world and having them interact with people that don't give permission, for example, to have these,
Yeah.
then we need to kind of be a little bit more open in our thinking. And so you're right, we started as a service business. We were doing work with Amazon Zoox and with Toyota and Midjourney and a whole bunch of different customers. And ultimately, we were sourcing people to come and give models context or to check the kind of outputs of different models. And we were doing it in a slightly different way to the kind of norm. We were posting tasks in a task dashboard, allowing anyone anywhere to participate, and not really caring where people are from. To us, it doesn't make a difference. Everybody gets paid the same, irrespective of kind of lines on a map. And so, in some ways, trying to move the standard service model on, but quite quickly came to the realization that the real prize to go after here is to standardize not so much how work is done, but standardize how we define what good looks like
Yeah.
for the entire industry. And so I'm not sitting here saying that we've got the answer, but what we're working on is a credible way to understand who created your data and if that data can be trusted. And importantly, to get an output and an attestation that's completely open and easy to audit, so that if something does go wrong, you can quite quickly figure out why, and you can make sure you don't do that again. And importantly, everybody else can quickly figure out why it went wrong, and they can learn from that lesson rather than the kind of siloed approach that we're in today. And so it's early. I want to kind of caveat what I'm saying here. We have a fully working version of the protocol in testnet, and we're aiming to ship a production version and invite the first set of customers and builders to start using it in February, there or thereabouts, pending some audits and making sure that security is up to scratch. However, that's where we're at today. And yeah,
But it's an interesting approach though, because I think you're kind of decoupling it away from companies who obviously have their own motivations, right, and incentives, whether that be the model makers or the companies doing this kind of data labeling and services today, which does bring a little bit more, I guess, democratization to it, and almost, trust. I think is like the key foundational thing between this is the vision in a sense. But I'm also
yep.
curious too, like when you think of what is ground truth, like how do you get to that answer, especially when things are subjective? Because feel like trust and truth in general is not necessarily a binary thing. It's either true or not. There's a spectrum, and so how do you account for that? Whether this is specific to Sapien or just your views in general around trust and quality of data and truth and all of those big meaty things.
If we solve this, we win, basically. Like,
Yeah.
this is the thing to go after. The way that we're approaching it, and everything that we're building will be open source. And so I'm very happy to talk about the way that we're approaching this. But the way that we approach is that we have, in fact, let me take a step back and let me kind of double
Yeah.
click a little bit on
Do
my
it.
answer for the last question. the current model is very traditional service business. So if you're an engineer, you're building a model, you knock on your procurement team's desk and you say, hey, I need X data set annotated, or I'm missing a data set, go and find me
Yeah.
this obscure thing. And then the procurement team will go out to market, knock on everybody's desks, send out tenders. We go through this giant process of annoying bureaucracy for weeks and weeks and weeks.
Yeah.
Eventually, the procurement team will select a vendor. The vendor will get a purchase order, and they'll go and start doing the work. And then months later, said ML ops engineer starts receiving data that he needed 2 months ago.
Yeah.
What we're trying to do is get rid of that entire nonsense and really collapse the process to get to the point where we can quickly get new data and quickly iterate on new models. And so in this new system, ML ops literally just comes into POQ, our system, proof of quality, or POQ can be embedded exactly where they're doing work today. And so the first adapter that we've built to allow engineers to work where they are is a LangChain adapter. This is a set of tooling used for the agentic space. And so it means that anybody building with that can directly connect and enable flow of data quite quickly. So rather than this huge complicated process, MLOps engineer is able to build a specification of what they're looking for. That then, the protocol then creates the kind of advert, if you like, to workers that can do the work. Once the work has been done by anyone, anywhere that has the right knowledge, credentials, and experience, it goes into a validation queue. Validation is, again, completely open. Anyone, anywhere can participate. And it's kind of working on a free market principle where anyone that has the right credential and the right experience is able to submit a validation, as well as a confidence score in terms of how confident they are that the answer is correct or incorrect.
So they're grading
we then
themselves
essentially-
with that confidence score effectively.
Exactly. They're saying like, yes, this is AirPods. I am very, very confident it's AirPods. So I'm going to essentially bet a ton of value that I'm right.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then it's done on a commit and reveal basis. What we need to avoid is all of the validators checking each other's answers and colluding, because then no value is created. And so they're all done in private. They submit their answer, they submit the bet essentially. And you essentially find the correct answer is kind of mapped with a bunch of people saying, yes, we all agree this is correct. And you'll have a whole bunch of others who are just like not doing the work, cheating, whatever, but they're way off to the right somewhere. We essentially take value from those that are cheating and found to be wrong and disperse that value to everybody that gave us what's found to be the kind of logically correct answer. There's a bit more detail here and a lot more math, but it's a consensus algorithm to enable us to get towards what a group of the right peers believe to be the right output. And importantly, without colluding and being properly incentivized for making sure that they give an honest answer.
Yeah, and that was one of my questions too, is how do you avoid the collusion and whatnot? But it's kind of a beautifully simple approach, which I think the best things typically are, right? It's almost that you're leveraging the knowledge of the commons, the crowds of people to get to where truth is, versus relying on one single source, which has points of failure, right? So it's kind of a very interesting approach there. And I'm curious, like, obviously we've kind of gotten into some of this, but you've worked at Coinbase, on chain and all of that stuff. What is the same about crypto in the AI world that we're in, and where is it different? Obviously we're getting into some of this on the data side, but are there any parallels that you see or where the future's going, from your experience in this world?
There's actually a ton of parallels here. If we're just speaking about the consensus piece, which we just mentioned before, this is a very well thought through problem in distributed computing systems. It's typically called the Byzantine general or consensus problem. And in that on-chain world, what you're trying to determine is how many of the nodes in a system need to agree on a particular transaction or state change before you can class that as being correct and accurate. And so compared to the problem that we're doing here, it's actually more simple. Everybody has all of the knowledge that they need to make the decision because everybody holds a copy of the entire ledger. And so
Yeah.
everybody can literally just reference the ledger, look at the transaction or state change. Is that possible? Can they do this? Yes or no? Commit. And so it's more about kind of game theory of making sure people are not trying to maliciously extract value or change things that are happening. So it's kind of like one layer of the problem. The difficulty in the AI space is that we have that same layer at the top, similar layer, kind of different topic, but the problem is very much the same. And then we have this extra layer of complexity in that things could be subjective rather than black and white, and the participants don't necessarily have all the information they need to participate. And so we need to kind of layer in credentials to ensure that the right parties are able to kind of come in, and so that we don't end up penalizing the one person that actually submitted the correct answer way up to the right, while the entire rest of the ecosystem said, no, it's actually wrong.
Yeah.
And so it's a more complex version of the same type of consensus problem. The benefit that we have, having built in the on-chain world for the past decade or so, is that as a team, we actually have quite a lot of experience thinking about this. And so we can apply principles and learnings from peers and from other protocols to kind of attack this data problem in a different way. I think the other piece, and it's a bit of a topic switch, but the other big parallel that I would draw between on-chain world and AI world is that we're still in the phase where the incentives are such that you should, or you want to, create something completely new from scratch and ignore everything else that's already been done. And so the cheesy analogy here is like, imagine a world where when the internet was first created, the world was like, you know what? TCP/IP, that sucks. Like, I don't want to use that. I'm going to go and create 500 different versions of it. And you end up with
Yeah.
this like crazy fragmented mess. Like, we wouldn't have the things that we have today if that had happened. That's exactly what's happening in the crypto world just now. You have thousands of different chains. That's not necessarily a bad thing. The bad thing is that none of these chains can talk to each other in like a truly trustless way. And so again, you end up with like disparate, weird, siloed stuff. In the AI world, we have exactly the same incentives set up. And so everybody is building their own model. Everybody is using proprietary algorithms, not necessarily proprietary compute, but most of the big ones use their own compute. And importantly, they're using proprietary data and proprietary annotation and inference and training. And so nobody is learning from each other. And we're ending up with tons of different models who are developing at different speeds and are good at different things. And the downside here, at least in my mind, is that it's going to take significantly longer to get to a good outcome because nobody's working together. It's like we've taken all of the smart people in the world and then given them each the same task and told them not to talk to each other. It doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense.
Yeah, it is interesting how you see some of these patterns in nature, in life, where you have tons of different iterations and things happening, and the best thing emerges at some point, and it feels very messy and out there, but it's like it just kind of feels like it naturally happens. Looking back, it was just obvious, So it's kind of interesting,
Right.
how some of that looks like a base kind of principle, first principle type of thing. But I'm curious, like, I want to get into the topic of synthetic data. And before I jump into that, one thought that hit my head, like, obviously these are humans in this protocol that you're building that will be doing this verification and going through this process you discussed. But do you see a world where AI can actually be one of those participants in the review of data? And like, is that possible? Because you can give AI incentives just like you can give a human incentives. Like, is that something you see that's plausible at some point in the future?
I mean, it's happening today. It's not plausible. It's like it's we're here. The way that we're designing our protocol is that we don't really care what type of data is needed.
Yeah.
And we also don't really care who the participants are. And so it needs to be serviceable for a user, for a validator, for somebody that needs work done. And that somebody could be ML ops person at
Yeah.
whatever company, or it could be an agent that is on a mission and doesn't have everything they need to complete said mission. And so I think thinking in that way, even if we're not in a world where agents are quite at that level of autonomy yet, we're not going to be a million miles away. But to
Yeah.
answer your question more directly, this comes into play most for the validation section. You could for sure create a model that would do the work, for example. But the real prize and the real efficiency that's more likely to be gained is a BPO somewhere that might have 100 people, and they're setting up themselves as a business to validate specific types of
Mm-hmm.
data that they have expertise in. And they layer AI agents over the top just to supercharge from a kind of efficiency perspective and provide an extra layer of intelligence before they submit said data. And so I'd expect that's the way that it's going to go initially. But there's nothing to say that it wouldn't be entirely replaced by very specific models in the future. And if you think about it, if we come back to this siloed analogy of everything not talking to each other, if ChatGPT, for example, builds a model that's incredible at dealing with health stuff,
Mm-hmm.
it's basically Dr. GPT, and Claude is terrible at it. And like, I
Mm-hmm.
ignore what I'm saying here, I have no idea which one would be better. You could imagine a world in which Claude would welcome the input of ChatGPT's incredible medical knowledge
Yeah.
when it's trying to upgrade its understanding of that field. And so there's no
Mm-hmm.
reason why you would exclude that type of knowledge transfer. But where we are today is that we're still in the phase of transferring knowledge from humans into these
Yeah.
models. And so it's less in demand, but certainly something that I expect to start happening relatively soon.
So let's get into the topic of synthetic data itself, right? Because there's a lot of people that feel like, at some point you may have model collapse where it's almost recursive in and of itself and it starts to degrade. So, how do you think about synthetic data and its impact on the future of models and training data and all of these things? Like, is there I think this gets back to the point we made earlier where there may be many ways of doing this and there may be one logical one that emerges that's just obvious to us in the future. But what's your take on that?
It doesn't matter to me as long as
Yeah.
the data is accurate. That's the key thing. If a certain piece of data has been created by a person versus created by an agent or a model, it doesn't make any difference providing said piece of data is actually true, accurate, high
Yeah.
quality, whatever metric you want to measure it by. And so I think it's much more important to determine fact versus fiction than it is to think about where said input came from. And so that's why
Mm.
we're not, our protocol is essentially agnostic to who you are, where you
Yeah.
are, what type of data is. It's really just seeking, is that true or not? Is that accurate or not?
Yeah, so that's where Sapien becomes a big part of that future in a sense. But like, there's a lot of people talking about, oh, this will lead to model collapse, but it could be the exact opposite, to where synthetic data is almost has this exponential positive benefit to the performance of the
Right.
models. To your point, like it really doesn't. And I've kind of shifted my thinking on this. Like, I'm questioning, does it matter who created the data, right? But I have not really thought about it in the sense that you just mentioned. That's not the vector to look at it on. It is the trust and accuracy and
Exactly.
validity of the data, not the
That's a better way to
creator.
put it. Is the
Yeah.
data valid? That's a much better way to put it. And that's, I mean, I'm using the word quality because everything that we're framing is like, we're basically creating a
Mm-hmm.
trust and quality layer for AI data. But you're absolutely right. It's like, is that input valid or not? And that should be the piece that matters. And what happens, or the reason that you have model collapse and hallucination and like bonkers outputs, is because you're not sanitizing the synthetic data sets and removing the nonsense. And so,
Yeah.
of course, you're going to get a bad output. All of these systems, if you peel away the complexity, they're garbage in, garbage out. And
Mm-hmm.
so, you have to remove the garbage to get to a good quality output.
Yeah. And I've mentioned this example several times on this podcast, but it ties back to what you mentioned earlier around incentives. So it was a study or research that OpenAI had done around hallucinations, and the problem leading to hallucinations deals with incentives, because these models are incented to provide a plausible answer, right? And it's just like when you are taking an exam, if you don't know the answer, they tell you to answer C. ChatGPT and Claude and all these are working in a similar fashion versus the SAT, where it's like, if you don't know it, don't answer, right? And it actually works in your favor. So if you change that incentive, and then what's the alternative, maybe the model asks, for more context, more clarification to provide a better response. And this is more on the inference side, but I think this incentives are such an important aspect of this entire system that's being built in a sense. But I want to shift to, I don't know if you have any thoughts on that point before I go to the
Really
next
quickly,
topic.
I think there is one comment there, and I think the idea of a system failing safely, I think, is really important, and it's kind of the
Mm,
missing piece in how many of the models currently behave. It is for sure part of the story for things like autonomous vehicles and humanoid robotics. When they don't know what to do, by default, they will just do nothing because that's the safest thing to
yeah.
do. But it's a really kind of common principle from the kind of non software engineering world, whether it's infrastructure or aeronautical or mechanical. If a piece of equipment fails, it should fail in such a way that doesn't harm the equipment around it and, importantly, the
Yeah.
people around
Yeah.
it. And so, in case of a model, if it doesn't know, it should be very clear that it doesn't know because that's the safest thing to do. And for a car, it should pull over and not do what the cars were doing in Austin recently, where they were driving straight past the school buses that had a little stop sign on the side
Mm,
and just
yeah.
tearing past. Like they weren't recognizing that. They for sure were seeing it, but they weren't successfully failing safe. They were
Yeah.
continuing on their way.
Yeah. It's the Charlie Bell, EVP at Microsoft, talking about similar things on the security side. It's like just assume whatever you're building will be breached or whatnot, and then make sure, to your point, it's failing in a safe way, or you have guards and safeguards around that. But I want to get your take on, what do you think the future is going to look like? We have several big frontier models. Do you think that's just going to be the future? We have several big models, and uh, people are fine tuning those specific to their use cases? Or do you believe we will have more smaller models being used in niche ways? And then that also kind of bridges into the topic of open source versus closed. I think Meta just recently has kind of pivoted their position some on this, which is interesting. But curious your take on the small versus large, open versus closed, and then fine tuning aspect.
Yeah, awesome question. I think first off, anyone that gives a real answer here or a confident answer here is full of shit. Nobody has
Yeah.
any idea. My best guess is that we'll end up with a ton of different models and you'll basically use the one that's best at that particular thing. But I think more likely, each of us will find a model that we're just more comfortable and familiar with that's really good in our native language. And then that will become the model that we individually use. And so I expect in different parts of the world, you'll have models that are more popular. But I don't expect that we're kind of coalesced towards one model to rule them all. I don't see that as the future at all. And then the open versus closed is super tricky. To me, the tech stack is too important to be closed source. Like it has to be open source.
Hmm.
However, the incentives are so huge that I can't see it becoming truly open source, at least not soon.
Yeah.
Hopefully, eventually it will become open source, but for now, I think it makes more sense for it to be closed. And it's certainly accelerating speed of development because we have competition and competition spurs speed. And so I guess in some ways it's good. In others, it's a black box, and that's kind of scary when you invite it into your everyday
Hmm.
life.
Yeah, totally. All right, I want to wrap us up with a few lightning round questions. So, just
Go
first
for it.
thing that kind of comes to mind. But what AI trend right now do you think is just mostly noise?
Social.
Mm,
This is really hot in the kind of on-chain AI world,
yeah.
which, to be clear, is primarily grifty nonsense, unfortunately. Although there are a couple of
Hmm.
really cool agentic builders out there who I have a ton of respect for, Wayfinder and Mamo and others, virtuals as well. But AI for social stuff is one of the most infuriating things ever. Social media, at least in my opinion, was borderline unusable pre AI, and it
Yeah.
is completely unusable post AI. The videos are just nonsense. The random garbled replies, horrible.
Hmm.
Hate it.
Yeah. Yeah. I do think we will have this turn to human created, human oriented as the differentiated thing, which is kind of awesome. Uh, but what's the hardest thing about building infrastructure, like the protocol versus building product. Any nuance there that you've learned along the way that differs between the two?
I think the difference in the right way to phrase this. To me, product is much more pointed. You're building something with a very specific set of kind of confines. And so it's much easier to figure out what good looks like. When you're building a protocol and you're aiming for it to be as general purpose as possible, it's much harder to figure out what good looks like. And you need to speak to a ton more people to get towards that good. And that's the process that we're in today, defining every single kind of touch point and ensuring that it is specific enough whilst also being general enough and simple enough that it's properly extensible and not just a nightmare to use. I think that's the hardest part on the protocol side.
What should humans always stay responsible for, no matter how good AI gets? And an acceptable answer here is nothing. It doesn't matter as well, if that's your view.
Oversight.
Oversight. Okay. Nice. A nice, simple answer there. What's the biggest constraint on AI progress that is not technical? That's not, energy related and whatnot?
Availability of high quality training data. And secondary to that, regulation and guidance that enables forward development in a safe way.
What's the hardest domain to validate from a data perspective, and why? Or maybe is there a few domains that are just very messy or weird?
It's weird that's always the hardest. If there's only a few people in the world that know the knowledge, you're doomed from the start, and it's really hard to get confidence in the actual data set. And so anything obscure, really hard, that requires specific expertise.
Yeah. All right, last one for you. Give me your tool in the AI world you personally cannot live without right now. Like and I love this framing I heard the other day. If you have a good product, if you were to lose it or it got taken away, are you going tomorrow to go get the replacement to that thing? Which is kind of an interesting way to think about product. But what's the one that you can't live without?
I'd love to say something like anti-gravity or cursor or one of these like IDE cool builder things. Truth is, I'm not the right person to be vibing with those. For me, it's granola. I am terrible at taking notes, and granola just saves my ass every single day. It's fantastic. If you haven't used it, download it. It's in the background. It listens. It creates really intelligent, concise notes and saves me literally every day. Love it.
Yeah. That's funny you mentioned granola. I'm a big user of that too. But the cool part, and this is like completely off on a tangent, but they have what they call recipes. So like mid-meeting, you can talk to it to have it do something. Like I had an example where my daughter came in during one of my meetings, so I had to go step out and do something. I was like, catch me up. And it did. And it even has one that's like, make me sound smart. And it'll give you relevant questions in the meeting. It's
I should have used that before this.
I know you could have been using it right now. Yeah.
Right.
Well, Rowan, thank you for being on Talking AI, talking a bit of AI with us. Where can people find you? Where can they learn more about Sapien? And you'll have some really interesting, I think, writings out there just around this proof of quality and whatnot that I think is worth checking out.
We're starting to speak more openly about where we're going with proof of quality. Expect a white paper very soon and expect full documentation shortly afterwards. Websites are currently kind of migrating from service world to a much more dev-oriented landscape. Sapien.io, main website. Earn.sapien.io is our kind of legacy app, if you like. I don't think anybody wants to find me, but should they? Rowan RK6 on X.
Awesome. Thank you, Rowan.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Talking AI podcast. If you enjoyed the show, give us a follow or subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to leave us a review. We love those. For more info on Talking AI, visit talkingaipodcast.com. Quick break in the pod. If you're listening to this podcast, chances are you've been thinking about how to actually use AI inside your business. And that's exactly why we built the AI Opportunity Finder. It's a free tool that helps you uncover high impact, tailored AI use cases based on your business, your goals, your pain points, and your industry. No fluff, no generic use cases, just real ideas that fit your business, and they're ranked by ROI potential. It takes about 3 minutes to run, and it's like having your own personal AI strategist for free. If you want to try it for free, check out the link in the show notes or go to hatchworks.com/AI-opportunity-finder.